September 27th, Friday, nighttime. Dense black smoke rises over the city of Beirut. Israeli forces have launched precise and targeted strikes on strategic objectives in the southern suburbs of Beirut to effectively destroy Hezbollah's command centers and weapon depots. At first, initial reports inform about the death of 2 residents of the Lebanese capital. Later, it is officially confirmed that a staggering 560 more people have tragically died, including the longtime leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, and several other high-ranking members of the group. Around 2,000 people were severely injured. Look at these unsettling scenes. Wreckage of destroyed homes, crushed cars scattered everywhere, smoldering balconies, and over there, take a closer look. A bed that looks like it belonged to a teenager is precariously hanging from a broken wall. This is what's left of the homes after the Israel Defense Forces struck 1,300 Hezbollah targets in Lebanon to eliminate what they described as immediate threats, as stated by their spokesperson. It all looks like an intense disaster movie scene, but it's the harsh reality for the people of Lebanon. Relations between Tel Aviv and Beirut significantly worsened after a new wave of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict erupted at the end of 2023. Hezbollah regularly launched solidarity attacks on northern Israel, and in response, the Israel Defense Forces shelled the group's strategic positions. The situation became even more tense on September 17, 2024, when unexpectedly residents started having their pagers explode on their hands. Some were picking fruit at the market, others were shopping in stores, and some were at a city festival. In an instant, screams from the injured echoed through the streets and ambulances frantically rushed by. 20 people tragically died and hundreds more were seriously injured. Lebanese citizens who once desperately hoped for stability now find themselves caught in the midst of a new and terrifying wave of violence. Airstrikes, explosions, and constant security threats have become an unsettling part of everyday life in Beirut, and the situation is only getting progressively worse as no real steps are being taken to resolve the ongoing conflict. In January this year, our dedicated film crew visited Beirut to document the city's ongoing struggles. We showed how Beirut endured a massive explosion at the port in August 2020, with its effects still visible on city streets, and how the country is going through a severe banking and financial crisis. The city, still not fully recovered from the horrific port blast, is now engulfed in violence and turmoil once again. The massive crater from the explosion is so large that people look like ants standing next to it. There used to be a dock here, but now a huge sunken liner lies on its side like a toy.
I felt like I was flying, and when I opened my eyes, I saw people around me bouncing. The force of the explosion was throwing them in all directions, and there was broken glass and blood everywhere in the streets.
A scorched field stretches for hundreds of meters. Roofs torn off, windows shattered, everything inside destroyed. You couldn't tell where floor and ceiling began.
It felt like a war zone, almost like a scene straight out of a horror movie.
On August 4th, 2020, the largest non-nuclear explosion in human history happened in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon.
The destruction, the bodies, and that thick yellow cloud hanging over Beirut looked like a post-apocalyptic landscape.
When people eventually recovered from the initial shock, they flooded the streets. But instead of clearing the wreckage left in the aftermath of the disaster, they started to protest, riot, and clash violently with the police. The half-ruined city quickly spiraled into chaos and has yet to fully recover. Our episode is from Beirut, a city that has undoubtedly been through hell and back.
My name is Alex Pototsky, and I'm a nomad reporter currently located here in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. For the People channel, we'll be showing you in detail how the city is living and surviving today, while also discussing the ongoing crisis, the revolution of 2019, the Beirut port, the civil war, and even how to rob a bank. Stick with us. It's definitely going to be very interesting. Right now, I'm heading straight to the epicenter of the Beirut explosion to show you up close the devastating aftermath of this terrifying industrial catastrophe. The massive explosion in 2020 killed around 200 people, injured roughly about 7,000 other individuals, and left over 300,000 individuals without a place to call home. This incredibly powerful blast further worsened an already severe economic crisis, and its far-reaching and long-lasting consequences continue to be dealt with even today.
In a warehouse at the Beirut port, approximately 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate were stored, which is equivalent to a kiloton of TNT. That's comparable to the power of a small nuclear charge. The damage resulting from the explosion amounted to $15 billion in a country that was already on the verge of bankruptcy.
I've reached the exact spot where finally you can clearly see the epicenter of the massive Beirut explosion and all its truly horrifying and devastating aftermath. The key landmark here is this large grain silo, which by some miracle managed to survive, even though the explosion occurred right beside it.
You can now see that much of the destruction has been partially cleared. Machinery is up and running, cars are parked, and the port has returned to its usual routine. However, the pile of twisted metal from destroyed vehicles still hasn't been removed, and people still can't forget the horror that engulfed the entire city. Salam, the owner of a hotel right in the heart of Beirut, was one of those hit hardest by the explosion.
I saw bodies, wrecked cars, destroyed buildings, and people in total panic and confusion. Blood was everywhere, in the cars, on the ground. Sometimes you couldn't even see the asphalt because of all the shattered glass. There were a huge number of such places. It affected entire streets, including this very spot. The consequences were unimaginable.
Another eyewitness of those events is Nadir, the owner of a shop near the port, who experienced firsthand what it's like to survive an explosion comparable to a nuclear one.
I felt like I was flying, and when I opened my eyes, I saw people around me bouncing. The explosion force threw them in all directions. The streets were full of glass and blood. I was in shock and couldn't understand what had happened. When I got to the scene, everything was destroyed. This place was unrecognizable.
By the time we arrived, the doors were lying on the ground. Everything was completely destroyed. All the things were out of place, and shattered glass was scattered everywhere.
No one was in the hotel at the time of the explosion because it had been closed during the pandemic. Every single wall here still bears the marks of the blast. Right after the tragedy, people from all over the country started flocking to Beirut to help the victims. One of those volunteers is Abed, who is accompanying me here in Lebanon now.
The sound of the explosion was heard even in Tripoli, and everyone found out about it through social media. It happened in the afternoon, around 4:30. We arrived at night and started helping, taking people to hospitals, looking for relatives, clearing the streets, pulling people out of the rubble. Everyone helped to mitigate the consequences of this terrible event.
The areas that suffered the most from the explosion were, of course, those closest to the port, historic parts of the city, upscale districts, expensive shops, and galleries. However, the powerful blast wave spread over 2 kilometers out, severely damaging poorer neighborhoods that were already struggling just to survive.
It was like something straight out of a horror movie, you know? Absolutely everything was destroyed, with blood splattered everywhere on the streets, and people were completely covered in it too. You couldn't even tell if someone was actually injured or if it was someone else's blood covering them. It was like a scene from a war zone. It really and truly felt like being inside a terrifying horror film.
According to the official version, the catastrophic explosion in the port was caused by ammonium nitrate that had been improperly stored without adequate safety measures. A small fire, started by welding work in a neighboring building, triggered the massive explosion. Even 3.5 years later, some people are still missing.
We were in complete shock for 20 days. We couldn't remember or decide what to do. We simply didn't understand what had happened. 20 of my friends tragically died because of that explosion. I don't want to think about it anymore.
I'm sitting on the side of a busy highway right now, and directly behind me, there's a long fence that stretches along the entire length of the Beirut port area, which was heavily impacted by the devastating explosion. On this fence, about every meter or so, are poignant and solemn photos of the many people who tragically lost their lives in the massive explosion that occurred in August 2020. In addition to these photos, there are deeply heartbreaking questions written on the fence in Arabic. Why did this terrible event happen? And who is responsible for this unimaginable tragedy that took so many innocent lives away from us? These are the painful, haunting questions being asked by the grieving relatives of those whose beloved children, wives, and husbands tragically died in this catastrophic and devastating event that shook the nation to its core.
The explosion destroyed the remaining working businesses. People lost their jobs, and many lost their breadwinners.
I used to have a bakery, but it was completely destroyed by the explosion, so I had to do some repairs and redecorate to eventually open a small coffee shop instead.
Directly behind me is one of the many buildings that were completely destroyed by the Beirut explosion. It's been 3 whole years since that tragic event occurred. And as you can clearly see, no one has even attempted to restore or repair the building. It's remained exactly as it was right after the explosion, essentially abandoned and untouched. There are still many such abandoned and damaged buildings scattered throughout the entire city. The explosion was so powerful that absolutely everything inside the building was completely destroyed.
The Prime Minister called for an investigation into the explosion and for those responsible to be punished within 48 hours, but they still haven't been found. The dollar exchange rate collapsed, prices skyrocketed, and power outages, already happening before, became even more frequent.
Now, I'm going to tell you about one of the most striking and surprising consequences of the ongoing severe economic crisis in Lebanon. Take a look. This is a luxury Corvette just casually parked right here on the side of the road. Parking in Beirut used to be paid, and people would easily use these parking meters right here without any hesitation. They had no trouble paying for parking at all during those times. But now, these meters don't work anymore, and nobody's collecting money from them anymore. So why did that happen, you might wonder? The reason for this is that over the course of the prolonged economic crisis, the local currency lost so much of its value that the coins people once used to pay for parking have become completely worthless. Essentially, they're worth absolutely nothing at all now. That's precisely why, at this particular point in time, these parking meters no longer function and haven't worked for quite some time already. To help you better understand just how drastically the exchange rate of the local currency has changed against the dollar, before, one single dollar was worth 1,500 Lebanese pounds, but now it's a staggering 89,000. Just imagine for a moment the currency has devalued by almost 80 times its original value. Naturally, those small coins that used to be commonly used for payments are now completely worthless and without any real value at all. Parking meters have essentially become totally useless and obsolete, much like the small change itself has become in this economic situation.
However, what really made the situation critical was the freezing of all Lebanese bank accounts. About 6 months before the explosion, the country's financial institutions suddenly shut down completely and stopped giving people access to their savings.
I came to the bank with a bottle of acid. I dialed the number like a regular customer. They asked me why I was there, and I said I wanted to see the director and give her a gift. This did not raise any suspicions.
Omar worked as a truck driver, but due to the country's severe financial situation, he was forced to sell it and deposit the $80,000 he received into the bank. At the time, the Lebanese pound had sharply collapsed, but Omar wasn't too worried, as his savings were safely in dollars. However, the banks came up with a new and unfair scheme. They refused to release dollars and would only issue local currency. And here's the real kicker. The exchange rate for dollars was set at the downright criminal rate.
When the bank trouble started, my brother got seriously sick, and I desperately needed money for his treatment. The black market exchange rate for dollars was between 5,000 to 6,000 Lebanese pounds per dollar, but the bank gave me the official rate, just 1,500.
Omar was given only $400. This was the small amount that banks would reluctantly pay their customers once a month. However, due to the extremely low exchange rate, this money quickly lost nearly all its value. Omar repeatedly called the bank and urgently requested to speak with the director, but it was all to no avail. So, in desperation, he showed up with a bottle of acid and took the director hostage.
When I walked in, I went straight to the director's office. I told her, "You don't respect me or my age." I asked her if she had kids. She said, "Yes, I have 2 boys." I replied, "God bless them, but it looks like you won't be seeing them again." and I won't be seeing my family either because I'm going to burn everything here, including myself, with this acid if you don't give me my money right now. I splashed a bit of acid on the desk to show its power. The director was absolutely terrified, started feeling dizzy, and immediately needed some water. I didn't want anyone to get hurt, so I told security I would release her in exchange for the general director. We made the switch.
The general director tried to distract Omar with small talk, but Omar wasn't giving up. After long and tense negotiations, they eventually agreed to return all his money.
I held the acid bottle to the general director's head to make absolutely sure I wouldn't get arrested, and then I walked out of the bank.
The most surprising thing was that the police didn't do anything to Omar. He was arrested for only a few hours and then released because members of the Depositors Protest Association threatened the general director. If he pressed charges, they would burn down every branch of his bank. This crisis, even with COVID and the explosion, somehow people have managed to survive. But all of this just added to the countless other problems already present.
This is Corniche, Beirut, the longest seaside promenade in the capital, stretching nearly 5 kilometers. It's one of the most popular spots in the city. People stroll here, exercise, men are playing squash right on the sidewalk, and kids are kicking a ball around. Fishermen are out catching fish, and the views of the Mediterranean are just breathtaking.
The fish they catch gets cooked right there on the spot. Look at how swiftly these two men expertly clean and prep the fish at lightning speed. Then the fish goes into the fryer and is served with delicious flatbread and a tasty sauce. Big fish are fried whole, no extra ingredients, just a squeeze of lemon and a few fresh veggies. The best way to enjoy this dish is right on the shore with a stunning view of the majestic Pigeon Rocks. But as soon as you step off the fancy streets into a neighboring one, the stark gap between rich and poor becomes instantly clear. Here's a neighborhood of rundown buildings that look more like abandoned ruins. The windows are smashed, rags are stretched across instead of glass, and the walls are peeling and stained. Yet people still live here. Laundry hangs on the balconies, old mopeds are parked by the entrances, and locals sit at plastic tables outdoors, chatting and socializing.
Look closely. Everything here is completely fenced off and thoroughly boarded up. It's absolutely clear that nobody lives in this building anymore. Getting inside is probably quite difficult, and no one knows exactly how much longer it will continue to remain abandoned and neglected.
And here's a car covered in a tarp. The owner likely can't afford gas anymore. Nearby, there's a broken staircase that looks dangerous to walk on, and a building wrapped in barbed wire that appears long abandoned.
Now, let's move to another district. Here we have ads for expensive watches, store windows showcasing models starting at $10,000. Right next to it, diamond pendants with prices starting from $1,500. People are dining in fancy restaurants, and the taxis here are far from economy class.
Lebanon is currently facing a severe and deepening economic crisis, and the gap between the rich and poor is steadily widening. The rich are getting even richer, while the poor are becoming poorer. Essentially, they live in two entirely different worlds and rarely cross paths with one another. However, on Beirut's Corniche, you can observe both groups together, as it's a unique place that remains accessible to everyone.
Among the luxury cars, you'll spot some really old ones. This minibus, for instance, is probably over 10 years old, and even the turn signals are broken. Along the streets, there are still abandoned and partially destroyed buildings, their walls scarred by shrapnel, traces of the many armed conflicts. But Lebanon is also a country of fresh and delicious food. Of course, open markets here are thriving and attract plenty of buyers. The air is filled with the scent of fresh fruits and greens. You can find exotic cherimoya here, as well as familiar radishes. Lebanon is especially famous for growing bananas. Not only are they plentiful in the markets, but they also grow along the roads. The local fast food isn't shawarma, it's kebab, though it's essentially the same thing. On one spit, chicken is roasting, on another, beef. The chef carefully slices the meat right onto the lavash, making sure not to lose a single piece. Then comes the real magic. He dips the lavash into oil and presses it against the grill, giving it a light char and infusing it with extra flavor. For dessert, there are two choices. The first one is nafa. Just take a look at the size of the dish itself. It's melted goat cheese, drizzled with sweet syrup, kind of like how kebab gets wrapped in flatbread. But I decided to go for the other dessert option instead.
I walked into the first shop I saw, and now they're making me some local coffee to try out. Honestly, there's nothing particularly special about it. There's either brewed coffee from a machine, or there's instant Nescafe, which they mix together with hot water, sugar, and cream to quickly create a beverage. They're preparing the Nescafe for me, a simple yet widely popular drink here among the locals, enjoyed by many people in this area on a regular, daily basis. Lebanon is a vibrant country where people are used to socializing and hanging out at all hours of the day and night. Whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, or even late at night, you'll often see groups of people sitting at tables outside local shops, cozy cafes, or on open terraces. They engage in casual conversations, enjoying life and each other's company in a relaxed and friendly atmosphere, characteristic of the Lebanese lifestyle. After savoring a delightful cup of instant coffee, I felt like having something sweet to indulge in, so I made the decision to finally try the local waffles, which are known to be very popular and widely enjoyed by many people here in Lebanon.
Prices for everything are listed in dollars because after the local currency significantly devalued, only American money is now in regular circulation.
It's quite funny, but the local waffles around here actually ended up being more like pancakes in both texture and appearance. They spread a generous, thick layer of creamy Nutella on top, then add fresh slices of ripe bananas, a variety of different nuts for added crunch and flavor, and finally finish it all off with another rich drizzle of Nutella to complete this decadent treat. I decided to go ahead and order myself a piece of this waffle, or rather, what actually feels more like a local Lebanese-style pancake. What can I say about it? Nutella is always Nutella after all, no matter how it's used. It's so incredibly sweet and possesses such a bold, rich, and intense flavor that the intense sweetness completely overwhelms, swingingly dominates, and overpowers any other subtle and nuanced flavors in the pancake. So if you're in Lebanon, definitely consider ordering a small portion. Or perhaps get one for 2, 3, or even 4 people. That'll be plenty.
Lebanon is a small country covering only 10,000 square kilometers, about the size of 4 Moscows. Thanks to its favorable climate, agriculture has flourished here. Lebanon has it all, mountains and scenic beaches. Also, prostitution is legalized here. The government issues licenses for erotic shows. All of this consistently attracted both tourists and travelers from around the world. Up to 60% of the national income came from trade, banking, and tourism. British journalists once famously described Lebanon as a Rolls-Royce with square wheels. Much of it was absolutely magnificent, but getting anywhere was tough. Before 1975, Lebanon was considered a true paradise for tourists, often referred to as the Switzerland of the Middle East because of its reliable and highly developed banking sector. In 1974, 1,400,000 tourists visited Lebanon, but then everything changed dramatically.
The current crisis is nothing new for Lebanon. For instance, directly behind me stands an abandoned building that has tragically become a lasting symbol of the devastating civil war. That prolonged war lasted 15 long years, stretching from 1975 to 1990. Even after all these years, this once bustling building remains completely deserted and abandoned.
The civil war erupted due to religious tensions. Lebanon is home to many religious groups: Sunnis, Shiites, Maronites, Alawites, Druze. 18 communities in total. To maintain peaceful coexistence, political power in the country was divided between representatives of all religious groups at a legislative level. This system is called confessionalism. According to this system, the president of Lebanon can only be a Christian Maronite, the prime minister a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of parliament a Shiite Muslim. Confusing, right? Well, the Lebanese are often confused too. Instead of solving problems together, at the slightest difficulty, communities start blaming each other, leading to new conflicts. This is exactly what happened in 1975.
Tensions were high for many reasons, but the real spark was the shooting of a bus full of Palestinians. After that, a civil war broke out and active hostilities began. This could no longer be stopped.
Eli was born after the Civil War, but several of his relatives actively participated in the intense fighting.
On April 13, 1975, a bus carrying Palestinian refugees was brutally shot at by Lebanese police, killing more than 20 people. That same morning, in the same area, the police got into a deadly shootout with Palestinian militants. There are many versions of what exactly sparked the conflict, but it all stemmed from a long-standing dispute between Christians and Muslims in Lebanon. The Christian parties opposed the presence of Palestinian refugees, claiming they had turned their camps into criminal undergrounds, while the Muslims supported their religious brethren. The shootout and bus attack were the final straw, and massive violent clashes between Christians and Muslims broke out on the streets of Lebanon. Soon, Syria, Israel, and Iran got involved, each backing different sides in the conflict. The bloodshed continued for 15 long years, claiming 144,000 lives and plunging the country into a severe economic crisis.
This was the border between West and East Beirut during the Civil War. There was a clear division of territories.
Just like Berlin after World War II, Beirut was divided into two parts, West and East.
The conflict engulfed all religious groups. The western part of the city was controlled by Islamic parties, while the eastern part was under Christian control. Thus, the city was divided into two camps that were feuding with each other. Each side defended its position.
The border was commonly referred to as the Green Line due to the overgrown trees and shrubs that covered the abandoned land. There was no official security presence, but attempting to cross from one side to the other was never considered safe.
There are certain things you need to know before coming to our country. This is really important. Now you will understand what I am talking about. Each street here has its own culture and traditions. For example, we can freely wear shorts, tank tops, or crop tops, and no one will say a word. But cross over to another street and everything's different. You'll need to wear something like a veil or, at the very least, ditch the shorts. It all depends on which party and religion dominate that area. And we need to adapt to the specific rules and cultural features that exist in this area.
Sally is 46 years old, having been born in 1977, and she has endured living through 6 different wars. She's currently divorced and is courageously raising 3 children entirely on her own.
In Lebanon, everyone is born with a religious affiliation listed on their personal records, like being Muslim. You can't change it, and even when naming your children, you have to consider the country's political situation, because this may affect their lives in the future.
This would indeed be hard to imagine happening in any other country, but even the names Salha chose for her children were significantly influenced by the political climate.
I was very careful not to give my kids names that would reveal their affiliation with any religion. I instinctively raised them to stay away from any political parties. I want my children to choose their own path. In my opinion, a person should not be treated with bias because of their name.
The Lebanese Civil War ended more than 30 years ago, but for the locals, every trip outside serves as a constant reminder of those events. As we drive through the streets of Beirut, you can still see bullet holes on the walls of many buildings.
It's not just bullets. Bombs left their marks too. You'll notice them if you look closely. Holes in the walls of buildings.
This was one of the bloodiest and most devastating conflicts since World War II. Many businesses and much of the infrastructure were completely destroyed. In Beirut alone, about a quarter of the residents were left homeless. Serious problems with electricity began, and during that time, the so-called generator mafia emerged. Private owners of gas generators who provided the electricity at their own rates.
This is the very first time I've actually seen one of those essential generators up close. Behind me, you can clearly see a small yellow shack surrounded by old, rusted barrels. That's where the powerful generators are located, providing much-needed electricity to the nearby homes and businesses. People have to pay a private company for using this supplementary electricity, and it often ends up costing them quite a bit of money, adding to their financial burdens.
Just like we buy subscriptions to video services, the Lebanese have to buy a subscription to a generator. Such a subscription can cost more than $100 a month, which is a lot of money. The electricity problem is so severe that there's not even enough power for traffic lights, although there aren't many accidents. Years of no traffic regulation haven't gone unnoticed. In Lebanon, hardly anyone follows the rules. People drive however they want, and chaos on the roads doesn't surprise anyone here. So, if you see a traffic light working, it's not thanks to the government, but rather private initiatives.
Sometimes private companies actually take on the full responsibility for managing and maintaining the traffic lights. They handle all the necessary repairs, connect them to electricity, and completely cover all the associated maintenance costs entirely by themselves.
Lebanon's public services are struggling under the pressure of its rapidly growing population. In 2011, the war in neighboring Syria started and hundreds of thousands of refugees poured in. Plus, there have been 12 official camps for Palestinian refugees in the country for decades. Syrians and Palestinians mostly don't work, don't pay taxes, but they heavily use the infrastructure and sometimes commit crimes like anyone else. Naturally, this draws attention.
Now, Lebanon is home to 2.5 million Syrian refugees. Considering the country's population is 5 million, Syrians make up 50% of the population. That's half of the entire population, and accordingly, they consume half of our resources. At the same time, they do not pay taxes.
A Lebanese woman with a Russian name, Larissa, is a human rights advocate, but she fights for the Lebanese people.
We don't even have enough electricity for the Lebanese. We don't have enough water resources for the Lebanese. We don't have proper waste management for the Lebanese. And yet, the refugees are using our resources, which we're already short on. And they use our resources and contribute nothing to the economy of our country. We need to meet the needs of our citizens. We don't have enough water. We're paying 2 or 3 water bills. We're paying 2 or even 3 bills for electricity because many people, besides using generators, have also bought small solar panels.
Let's break down the monthly utility bills for a typical Lebanese person. Before the crisis, government electricity was about $9, private generators were $50 to $60, water supply was roughly $20, and bottled water added another $20, totaling $99 to $109. After the 2019 crisis, electricity prices rose significantly. Government electricity now costs $17 to $20, and private generators are between $100 and $150. Water is scarce, available only every few days, and buying bottled water is essential. Water supply still costs around $20, as does bottled water. Now, the total is $157 to $210.
We don't even have a proper sewage system. We clean it ourselves. Every neighborhood has trucks and people for this. What are you talking about? How can you collect taxes from us if we don't even have proper infrastructure? It's illegal. This shouldn't be happening.
The economy was declining and prices kept rising. By 2019, the unemployment rate among young people had reached 43%. Lebanon already had some of the highest mobile phone tariffs in the world, so people mostly used free messaging apps to make calls. Then, the government announced a tax on WhatsApp, and the country exploded. Tens of thousands of people flooded the streets of Beirut.
This happened on October 17th at 6 in the evening, and the protests haven't stopped since. We were all running, although we were really just walking fast, but it felt like running from the anger. Everyone was shocked. We already pay quite a lot of money for using mobile services.
Paula was one of the very first to hit the streets. As the crowd of protesters marched, the education minister's motorcade drove by. People surrounded his car, and one of his guards suddenly fired a shot. That was a significant turning point.
One of the bodyguards fired a shot into the crowd, hoping to scare people off and protect his corrupt boss. That's when things really heated up and got completely wild, because there were about 1,000 of us at first, but within just a few hours, more people joined, swelling the crowd to over 10,000, then 20,000. People came flooding in from all over, from every neighborhood, from every corner of the city, and we stayed there for that entire first night. Nobody went home. Nobody even considered leaving.
Besides the WhatsApp tax, the government decided to raise taxes on 35 other goods, including gasoline and cigarettes, which practically everyone smokes here. On top of that, they cut social benefits for soldiers, public employees, retirees, and the disabled. People were left with nothing, no jobs, prices were constantly rising, and living conditions were awful. People had nothing left to lose, and they took to the streets. The WhatsApp revolution was gaining momentum.
One of the central locations for the protests was a building that used to be a cinema, which people call the Egg. During the Civil War, it stood on the border between West and East Beirut, and it was impossible to access.
This place holds such deep importance to us because it symbolizes the war and everything we've been through. For so many years, we weren't allowed to come here. It's part of our collective memory of Lebanon, a country once known in the 60s and 70s as the Switzerland of the Middle East. All the countless graffiti covering these walls serve as haunting reminders of the bloody wounds from our past.
Inside, the building is almost completely covered in graffiti. For example, here's one that says, "Dear government, Lebanon isn't your cash cow. Never give up on your dreams." Now this place holds memories not only of the Civil War. Every day, more and more tents were being set up in the square. The police tried several times to disperse the protesters, even using tear gas. Plus, men in plain clothes started appearing in the square. They attacked protesters, looted, and set the tents on fire.
Every time, they would show up on motorcycles, armed with knives, clubs, and sticks, violently attacking us without hesitation. They injured several people during these assaults. In the end, they not only attacked, but also set fire to all the tents that had been set up near the mosque in the square, burning everything to the ground and leaving nothing behind but ashes.
At the peak of the protest movement, 1.5 million people took to the streets, representing 1/4 of the country's entire population. In the end, the prime minister resigned, but the government and the overall situation essentially stayed the same. Only COVID managed to effectively stop the revolution. Think about it. Since 1975, there's been a civil war, an influx of refugees, a revolution, COVID, and an explosion. And then finally, the Lebanese government declared default.
We lost all our money in the banks. We lost everything we had worked for. But despite that, we still have our hearts, our minds.
The COVID lockdown only made things significantly worse. Many businesses were forced to shut down, leading to a sharp increase in unemployment. Terrifying inflation drove countless people into total poverty.
About a week after the revolution began, banks suddenly closed their doors to customers without warning. From then on, they operated internally, quietly transferring about $15 billion out of Lebanon. Citizens were cut off from their savings, leaving many in severe financial distress and uncertain about their future.
Pierre Gemayel is a lawyer who founded an association of dedicated lawyers fighting against corruption.
The Lebanese people need to eat, cover their children's education, and buy essential medicine for their aging parents. Because of these urgent needs, they repeatedly begged banks for small amounts from their accounts. However, the banks consistently refused, leaving countless families in desperate situations.
The national currency devalued sharply, and the country's national debt reached $90 billion, making it one of the largest in the world.
After many frustrating refusals, people started shouting, arguing, and even fighting, growing more aggressive and hostile toward the banks.
As mentioned before, the banks allowed withdrawals of no more than $400 per month, and only at the specific rate they set. Naturally, that rate was significantly lower than the actual market rate.
If someone had $100,000 in their account, they might never be able to withdraw all their money over the course of their lifetime. When people faced urgent health problems, emergencies, or critical situations, they desperately tried to negotiate with the banks to access at least a portion of their funds, but it was often to no avail.
The banks, of course, would negotiate, but they were in no particular hurry to give out the money. In the end, the Lebanese became so desperate that they started attacking the banks en masse. Such attacks happened nearly every single day.
The bank manager firmly told me I couldn't come back anymore because I wouldn't get any money from them, and if I showed up again, I'd definitely have some serious problems to deal with. I was really frightened and went home, but deep down I knew for sure that there were people and even entire organizations out there that were dedicated to helping depositors fight for their rights. So, I decided to reach out to them. And they assured me they would come along with me for support the next time I went back. This gave me a sense of hope that I could finally get my money. I needed it desperately, as it would allow me to address my pressing health issues.
This is Haikimi, a humble Arabic language teacher. Over her life, she managed to save up $28,000. But then the bank suddenly froze her account. She needed an urgent eye surgery. She was losing her sight, and without her savings, she could have gone blind. Haikimi reached out to other affected people, and together, they went to the bank.
We arrived at the bank with a group of about 50 to 60 people, all standing together in solidarity. I asked again for my money, but they flatly refused, just like before. In the end, the situation escalated, and the bank ended up calling the SWAT team to handle the crowd.
Haikimi wasn't even asking for all the money in her account, just enough to cover the costs for her necessary surgery.
They violently threw me on the floor, and I was terrified. I'm 81 years old, and if I face more serious health problems, I won't have money to handle them. It's terrifying at my age. In the end, we left the bank empty-handed, with nothing to show for our efforts and no idea what to do next.
The elderly woman didn't manage to get anything. Now she receives her $400 a month, But at the bank's exchange rate, that money is practically worthless. However, most depositors didn't give up and started banding together. Samia, a teacher, joined the Depositors Association to help others access their money.
When a depositor has a small amount in the bank, they can usually manage to get it out without too much trouble. For instance, if someone has 5 to 10,000, or at most 15,000, we've been able to help many people successfully recover their money in these cases. In addition to that, we also actively support those who are sick, disabled, or students struggling to pay for their education. So far, we've already helped between 300 and 400 people who were facing these kinds of financial challenges, and we continue working tirelessly to assist as many more as we possibly can.
The association even helps those individuals who come to the bank with weapons or, like Ammar, with a bottle of acid.
In one instance, I accompanied a woman to the bank, and she showed up carrying what appeared to be a real gun. It completely shocked the staff and caused quite a commotion, but it turned out the gun was fake. It was just a toy. The staff only realized this after she had already successfully retrieved her money and left the bank. In another case, a depositor entered the bank with an actual weapon, which understandably created even more tension. Representatives from our association were present at the time as well. He was arrested for 7 to 10 days, but thankfully, no one in the bank was harmed during the incident. These depositors who bring weapons aren't trying to hurt anyone. They're just desperate, pushed to their limits, and willing to do almost anything to get their money back.
Judges are quite understanding of these people, realizing that they're acting not out of aggression, but out of sheer desperation. What's most surprising is that throughout all the bank attacks, no one has ever been physically harmed in the banks. Of course, people no longer trust the banks and now keep their money in dollars at home instead. According to UNICEF, a staggering 70% of Lebanese people live below the poverty line. It's incredibly hard to imagine how anyone survives in these harsh conditions without connections in the government or foreign bank accounts to rely on.
Sometimes I'm just completely amazed at how some people manage to cook meals and buy things every single day despite everything going on around them. Fortunately, I work in the NGO sector, where I'm paid in dollars. That financial stability has truly been a lifesaver for us, shielding me and my kids from the worst effects of the massive inflation and ongoing economic turmoil. Without this stability, I honestly don't know how we would have managed to successfully manage to get by during these difficult times.
Most people these days dream of leaving Lebanon for a better life elsewhere. For many families, help from relatives working abroad is practically the only reliable source of income they have.
Lebanon has a population of around 5 million people, but the Lebanese diaspora numbers almost 13 million worldwide. These individuals consistently send money back to their families, as family bonds in Lebanon are incredibly strong and close-knit. This deep sense of familial connection helps people survive during tough times, providing essential support when needed most.
That's how Salka managed to save enough money for her son to go study in Germany. Now all their hopes are on him.
I'm planning to finish my studies and then get a job. Most likely I'll stay there because they have everything you could possibly need: reliable electricity, clean water, and efficient public transport. There are no wars to worry about, which makes it much safer overall. And there's an actual functioning government, a real working government that genuinely takes care of its people. There's better pay, better future prospects, and a good pension system. Everything is just so much better there compared to here. But if things in Lebanon ever improve significantly, maybe I'll seriously consider coming back someday. Though, to be honest, I don't really believe that. We always say that in the next 5 years, something will change, that a solution will be found, that people will come to an agreement. But I think the political and social structure of Lebanon will always lead to more conflicts, one way or another. It often feels like the hopes for lasting peace are overshadowed by the reality of ongoing tensions and unresolved issues. Our government does not want to change.
Karim's sister is 21, and her plans for the future are quite similar to his.
I've always dreamed of leaving this country for a brighter future. Like everyone else, I want stability and peace. Having never experienced real calm in Lebanon, it's hard not to dream of a place where life feels more certain.
But here's the interesting thing. Despite all the turmoil Lebanon has gone through over the years, people still manage to not only survive, but also find ways to have fun.
In Lebanon, despite the crisis, you'll notice that Fridays and Saturdays see packed pubs and nightclubs as people seek joy in the midst of chaos.
Nighttime Beirut is quite peaceful. There aren't many cars, and the streets are well lit. Though this is a wealthy neighborhood where even some buildings have their own lighting. So, for some, the electricity situation isn't too bad.
I've filmed a lot of different things throughout my life, but I've never actually filmed inside nightclubs before. Honestly, I couldn't even imagine there being any kind of vibrant nightlife scene in Lebanon. However, it's Friday night, it's already past midnight, and I'm eagerly waiting for a taxi to take me to one of Beirut's most unique and exciting clubs.
We arrive at a place that looks much more like an industrial zone than a club, but people are already gathering in the parking lot outside. George, the club manager, meets me outside and personally takes me right in. During the Civil War, this building was used by militias to store weapons, which is why it's called the bunker, though it never actually was one.
B018 was one of the most popular spots in Lebanon back in 1998. All the country's influential and trendy people would come here to enjoy its unique atmosphere and vibrant nightlife. If I'm not mistaken, in 2009 it was even ranked as the third best underground club in the world. It's the only underground club in the entire Middle East, Africa, and the Gulf countries, making it a truly unique destination for nightlife enthusiasts from across the region. Its reputation for unforgettable nights and cutting-edge music continues to draw crowds even today. Nightlife is a great escape from depression, wars, and life problems. When things get tough, you head to a party and forget it all for a night. You won't forget everything permanently, but the music helps you relax and unwind. The crowd's energy and rhythm provide a temporary sanctuary to let go of your worries and enjoy the moment.
The story of this club reflects the life of the entire country. It thrived for 25 years, then the revolution started, followed by COVID, the port explosion, and new protests. But the most amazing thing is that people never give up and always find a way to rebuild what they deeply love, even after enduring the toughest and most challenging blows. This is truly something important that we can all learn from the resilient Lebanese.
We always rise from the ashes. We know that life will keep moving forward no matter what happens to us, despite the numerous challenges and setbacks we face.